The security cameras at Willow Heights Estate recorded everything except what mattered most. They tracked delivery trucks, logged visitor plates, captured every angle of the iron gates, the marble fountain, the imported hedges trimmed into perfect geometry. But they never followed the small figure in the navy blue uniform who slipped through the service entrance each morning at 7:14 a.m. alone. Before we dive in, smash that like button if you believe every child deserves to feel safe. Subscribe for stories that matter, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's begin. His name was Noah Rivera, 8 years old, son of Elena Rivera, who polished floors in houses that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. A boy who'd learned his most important lesson before he could read: disappear. Head down, eyes forward. Don't stop to talk to anyone. Elena's morning instructions were as routine as breakfast. She adjusted his backpack straps, smoothed his collar, checked his lunch money twice. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her eyes held something else. Something that looked like apology she'd never speak aloud. Straight to the bus stop. Straight to school. You understand? Noah understood. He always understood. He understood that children like him, children of housekeepers, gardeners, cooks, existed in a strange in-between space. They lived inside luxury, but owned none of it. They walked through rooms filled with crystal and silk, but left no fingerprints. They were taught to move through the world of the wealthy like ghosts, present but invisible, seen but never noticed. His mother had worked at the Ashford estate for 4 years. For years of teaching Noah the unspoken rules that kept them safe, kept them employed, kept them from becoming the kind of problem that got quietly removed. Don't ask the Ashford for anything. Don't interrupt conversations. Don't touch things that aren't yours. Don't draw attention. Especially that last one. Especially for men like Victor Ashford, whose tailored suits and easy smile appeared in business magazines under headlines about real estate empires and charitable foundations. Men whose security teams wore earpieces and carried guns hidden under expensive jackets. Men whose phone calls made city permits appear overnight and legal problems disappear just as fast. Noah didn't understand his mother's employer the way adults did. He just knew that Mr. Ashford was someone you didn't bother. Someone whose time was too important. Someone who barely glanced at the help, which made invisibility easy. Every morning, Noah walked the estate's winding pathway alone, past the tennis courts where Mr. Ashford's daughter took private lessons, past the garage housing cars that cost more than Noah's entire elementary school, past the pool house where weekend parties left champagne bottles floating like expensive trash. The walk took 12 minutes. 12 minutes from his mother's small room in the staff quarters to the estate's main gate, where he'd wave to Marcus, the security guard, who always nodded but never stopped him, never asked where his mother was, never questioned why an 8-year-old walked to a public bus stop alone while the Ashford children were chauffeured in SUVs with tinted windows. That was the rule, too. Staff children were not estate children. The gate buzzed open. Noah stepped through onto the sidewalk. And that's where the protection ended. The boundary between safety and the outside world was marked by iron and cameras and men with earpieces, but it only protected those who mattered. Once Noah walked through those gates, he was just another kid, just another target. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. He started walking. The first time Noah noticed the man, it was a Tuesday, early October, the kind of morning where fog still clung to the streets and made the world feel smaller, quieter, more dangerous. The man stood near the corner market, pretending to read his phone. Navy jacket, jeans, baseball cap pulled low. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. Just another person on a morning sidewalk. Except he was there the next day too. Same spot, same jacket, same careful stillness. And the day after that, Noah's 8-year-old instincts couldn't name what was wrong. He didn't have language for predator or stalking or danger assessment. He just knew the feeling that crawled up his spine every morning when he turned the corner and saw the man waiting. Always pretending to be doing something else. Always positioned where he could watch. Always there. Noah never told his mother. How do you explain fear when there's no proof? How do you describe the way someone looks at you when they haven't actually done anything? How do you ask for protection when you've spent your entire life learning not to ask for anything? So he did what he'd been taught. He made himself smaller, walked faster, kept his head down, tried to disappear even harder. But the man kept appearing. And every morning, as Noah walked those 3 blocks alone, he learned the cruelest truth about the world he lived in. Walls and gates and security cameras protected property and power. They protected people who mattered. They didn't protect children who'd learned to be invisible. Because the world doesn't see what it's been taught not to notice. And predators? Predators see everything else. Noah started counting. Day 7. The man in the navy jacket stood near the bodega, cigarette in hand, eyes tracking every child who passed. Day 11. He'd moved closer, now positioned at the newsstand 1 block from the bus stop, pretending to browse magazines he never bought. Day 14. Close enough that Noah could see the scar above his left eyebrow. Close enough to smell his cologne mixed with stale smoke. Children notice patterns before they understand them. They feel danger the way animals sense storms. Instinct without explanation. Noah's stomach twisted tighter each morning. His steps grew faster, his breathing shallower. But when he finally found the words to tell his mother, she was already moving. Elena Rivera reported it on a Wednesday evening, standing in the estate security office with her uniform still smelling of lemon polish and her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. "There's a man," she told Marcus, the head of security. Same man, every morning, watching the children at the bus stop near Maple Street. Marcus barely looked up from his monitors. 12 screens showing every angle of the estate's perimeter, every entrance, every expensive inch of protected property. "Has he approached your son?" "No, but..." "Has he said anything? Done anything?" Elena hesitated. "He watches. Every single day. The same man in the same spot." Marcus leaned back in his chair, sympathy in his eyes, but policy in his voice. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but the bus stop is 3 blocks outside estate property, outside our jurisdiction. If you feel there's a genuine threat, you should contact the police." So she did. The officer who took her call was polite, professional, completely unhelpful. "Has this individual made physical contact with your child?" "No." "Has he made verbal threats?" "No, but he's always there, always watching." "Ma'am, standing on a public sidewalk isn't a crime. If he hasn't committed an actual offense, there's nothing we can do. We can't arrest someone for existing in a public space." "But my son is 8 years old and this man." "Keep your phone handy. Document any direct interactions. If he approaches or speaks to the child, call us immediately." The line went dead. Elena reported it again 4 days later. Different officer. Same response. The system designed to protect people had a threshold, and watching didn't cross it. Following wasn't illegal until it became assault. Fear wasn't evidence until it became trauma. By then, the man had moved again. Now he stood half a block from the bus stop, close enough that Noah could hear him cough, close enough to see the way his eyes followed not just Noah, but 3 other children who walked that route. A girl with red braids, twin boys who held hands, a teenager with headphones, all of them alone, all of them unprotected the moment they stepped outside gates and security systems that were never built for them. Noah stopped sleeping through the night, started eating less. His teacher sent home a note asking if everything was okay at home, if there were stressors, if he needed to talk to the school counselor. But how do you explain that the world feels dangerous when no one else sees the danger? How do you describe fear that has no vocabulary except the sick feeling in your stomach every morning? Elena saw it in her son's eyes. The way he flinched at sudden movements. The way he checked over his shoulder constantly. The way he'd started asking if maybe, just this once, she could walk him to the bus stop. But she couldn't. Service workers at Willow Heights Estate worked 12-hour shifts. They arrived before the residents woke and left after they slept. They cleaned bedrooms and cooked meals and polished silver while their own children navigated the world alone. That was the trade-off. That was survival. Elena worked harder to compensate for her worry. Stayed later. Took extra shifts. Pushed through the exhaustion that made her hands shake and her vision blur. Until the morning she couldn't push anymore. She collapsed in the Ashford's marble foyer at 6:47 a.m., her mop bucket clattering across imported tile, her body finally surrendering to pneumonia she'd ignored for 2 weeks because missing work meant risking everything. The ambulance came through the service entrance. Mr. Ashford never saw it. And at 7:14 a.m., Noah stood alone in his mother's small room in the staff quarters, staring at his backpack, knowing she wasn't coming back. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. Knowing he'd have to walk those 3 blocks alone. Knowing the man would be there, waiting, watching, patient as a spider in a web. Knowing that every adult he'd tried to tell had given him the same answer. We can't help until something happens. But something was happening. It was happening every single morning. It was happening to children the world had decided weren't worth protecting until they were already broken. Noah picked up his backpack. His hands were shaking. The walk to the gate had never felt longer. And this time, when he stepped through onto the sidewalk, he knew with absolute certainty, today was different. Today, fear wasn't just a feeling anymore. Today, it had become inevitable. There are people in this world you walk past without seeing. And then there are people who command every molecule of air in a room the moment they enter it. Vincenzo Moretti was the second kind. Noah saw him for the first time on a Thursday morning, standing at the base of the estate's grand entrance. The main entrance, the one reserved for people who mattered. Not the service door, not the side gate, the front. The man stood perfectly still, one hand adjusting a cufflink on his burgundy suit jacket. The color was deep, rich, the kind of fabric that caught light differently than normal clothes. Everything about him was sharp, pressed, tailored, exact. Like he'd been assembled by someone who understood that details were the difference between respect and fear. His hair was silver-streaked, combed back from his forehead with the kind of precision that suggested a barber who made house calls. Not gray from age, silver, like polished metal. It caught the morning sun and made him look both distinguished and dangerous. But it was the beard that made Noah stop walking. Thick, perfectly trimmed. The kind of facial hair that required maintenance, attention, control. It framed a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Strong jaw, dark eyes that didn't blink often, expression that gave nothing away. And at his collar, just visible above the crisp white shirt and burgundy jacket, were tattoos. Noah couldn't see the designs clearly from across the circular driveway, but he could see the dark ink crawling up the man's neck like secrets that refused to stay hidden. Patterns that suggested stories. Violence. History. The man didn't move like other people. There was no fidgeting, no checking his phone, no impatient shifting of weight. He simply stood, hands now clasped in front of him, posture erect, radiating the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Behind him, 2 black Mercedes were parked in perfect alignment, gleaming, expensive, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. The engines weren't running, but Noah could somehow tell the cars were ready. Ready to move, ready to leave, ready for whatever came next. 3 men in dark suits stood at various positions around the driveway. Not close to the man in burgundy. Not hovering. Just present. Positioned. Watchful. They wore earpieces and sunglasses despite the early hour. Their jackets fit in a way that suggested they were hiding something underneath. Security, Noah's brain supplied. But not like Marcus at the gate. These men looked like they could end conversations that hadn't even started yet. And they all deferred to the man in burgundy without a single word being spoken. Noah had lived around wealthy people his entire life. He'd seen power in the form of expensive watches and raised voices and people who expected doors to open before they reached them. But this was different. This was the kind of power that made people lower their voices. The kind that made grown men check their words twice. The kind that walked into rooms and changed the temperature. Mr. Ashford appeared at the estate's front entrance, descending the marble steps with his practiced smile and extended hand. "Vincenzo, good to see you. Sorry to keep you waiting." The man in burgundy didn't smile back. He shook Ashford's hand with the efficiency of someone fulfilling a social obligation. Nothing more. "Victor." One word. That's all he said. But the way he said it, flat, controlled, utterly devoid of warmth, made it clear who held the real power in this conversation. Even from 50 feet away, Noah could feel the shift. Mr. Ashford, who'd never acknowledged Noah's existence in 4 years, who spoke to staff members like they were furniture, suddenly looked smaller. His smile tighter, his movements more careful. Noah should have kept walking, should have continued his route to the gate, slipped through onto the sidewalk, faced his morning alone like always. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the man in burgundy stood, immovable, unafraid, protected by walls of authority that had nothing to do with gates or cameras. Maybe it was the way everyone else seemed to orbit around him like he was gravity itself. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was because Noah was 8 years old and terrified, and his mother was in a hospital bed, and every adult he'd tried to tell had dismissed his fear as invisible as he was supposed to be. Maybe it was because power, real power, felt safer than silence. The man in burgundy turned slightly, his dark eyes scanning the driveway with the casual awareness of someone who missed nothing. For half a second, his gaze passed over Noah, then moved on, dismissed, invisible again. But in that half second, Noah made a decision that would break every rule his mother had ever taught him. A decision that would cross boundaries that weren't meant to be crossed by children who were supposed to disappear. He adjusted his backpack straps. He took a breath, and he started walking, not toward the gate, not toward the bus stop, not toward the waiting predator 3 blocks away. He walked toward the man no one approached, toward Vincenzo Moretti, toward the kind of power that could either save him or destroy him. And every person watching held their breath. Noah's shoes made small sounds on the circular driveway's stone pavers. Tap, 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 each step impossibly loud in the morning stillness. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. Security guards, estate staff, Mr. Ashford mid-sentence on the marble steps. But he kept walking, toward the man in burgundy who radiated danger the way fire radiated heat. 20 feet away. 15. 10. The security detail moved first. One man shifted his stance, weight forward, hand drifting toward his jacket. Another took a half step, angling his body to intercept. The third spoke in his wrist, low and urgent, warning crackling through earpieces. But Vincenzo Moretti raised one finger, barely a movement, just a slight lift of his index finger, and every one of them froze mid-motion. Noah stopped 3 feet away. He was small, 8 years old and slight for his age, wearing his white school shirt that his mother had ironed the night before she collapsed. The fabric was crisp but worn, washed so many times the collar had started to fray. His navy pants were a size too big, held up with a belt cinched tight. His backpack, dark blue with a broken zipper, hung from shoulders that looked too narrow to carry anything heavy. But it wasn't his size that made the moment remarkable. It was his chin, lifted, despite the trembling in his hands, despite the tears threatening at the corners of his eyes, despite every instinct screaming at him to run, to disappear, to follow the rules that had kept him safe his entire life. He looked up at Vincenzo Moretti, this man carved from power and violence and authority, and his voice came out soft, not weak, soft, the way truth sometimes sounds when it's been held too long. "Sir," the word hung in the air. Behind him, someone gasped. Mr. Ashford stopped mid-sentence. A gardener 30 feet away with hedge trimmers actually lowered his tools, staring. Because this didn't happen. Children like Noah, staff children, invisible children, didn't approach men like Vincenzo Moretti. They didn't interrupt. They didn't ask. They certainly didn't stand in his space with their chin lifted and fear in their eyes and hope in their voice. "Sir, could you walk me to the bus stop?" Vincenzo's expression didn't change. His dark eyes held steady on Noah's face, reading something the child couldn't name. Noah's voice cracked on the next words, but he forced them out anyway. "I don't feel safe." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens when the world stops spinning for half a second, when reality holds its breath. The security team stood frozen. Mr. Ashford's mouth hung slightly open. Even the morning birds seemed to stop singing. Because in those 5 words, "I don't feel safe," a child had just asked the impossible. Not for money. Not for a favor that would cost him years of debt. Not for mercy or forgiveness or the kind of help that came with strings attached. Just protection. Just safety. Just someone to walk with him 3 blocks because the world had become too dangerous to navigate alone. Vincenzo Moretti moved then, and the movement was so deliberate, so controlled, that it felt choreographed. He lowered himself smoothly, knees bending, burgundy suit somehow never wrinkling, until he was at Noah's eye level. This close, Noah could see the tattoos more clearly. Dark patterns that crawled up from his collar. Designs that looked like they told stories in a language Noah didn't speak. Could see the silver in his beard catching morning light. Could see that his eyes weren't just dark. They were the kind of dark that absorbed everything and reflected nothing back. Why don't you feel safe, Noah? The child startled at hearing his own name. He hadn't said it, hadn't introduced himself. But men like Vincenzo Moretti knew things without being told. Noah's hand lifted, pointing toward the estate gates, beyond the iron bars and security cameras, past the boundary where protection ended and the real world began. There's a man, Noah whispered. He's always there, always watching. Vincenzo's gaze followed the direction of Noah's trembling finger, and his entire body shifted, subtle but absolute, like a weapon being cocked. And there across the street, leaning against a parked van that had no business being in this neighborhood, was the man in the navy jacket. Same position, same patient stillness, same predatory awareness that made children's instincts scream. But this time, when their eyes met across the distance, the man in the navy jacket didn't look away, didn't pretend to check his phone, didn't bother with the performance. He smiled, not a friendly smile, not even a threatening one. Something worse, knowing. The smile of someone who understood exactly what he was doing, who'd been testing boundaries, mapping patterns, waiting for the moment when the small boy with the frayed collar would walk those 3 blocks alone and unprotected. The smile of a predator who'd found his prey. Vincenzo Moretti saw it all in that single exchange. The positioning, the patience, the calculated risk of operating this close to a protected estate. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was someone hunting, and they'd chosen the most vulnerable target, a child who'd been taught to disappear. Vincenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before, but somehow carried more weight. What's your name, little one? Noah Rivera, sir. And your mother? Elena Rivera. She works here. She's in the hospital. Everything clicked into place then. The calculation behind the predator's timing. The vulnerability of a child suddenly alone. Vincenzo Moretti stood, his full height casting a shadow across Noah's small frame. And what he said next would shatter every boundary between their worlds. Vincenzo Moretti didn't ask permission, didn't consult his security team, didn't check his schedule or make calls or delegate the task to someone more appropriate. He simply extended his hand toward the gate. Show me. 2 words that made Mr. Ashford take an involuntary step backward, made the security detail exchange glances that screamed, "This is a mistake," made the entire estate hold its collective breath, because men like Vincenzo Moretti didn't walk staff children to bus stops. They didn't involve themselves in the small problems of invisible people. They operated in boardrooms and back alleys, in spaces where power was currency and violence was negotiation. But Noah's small hand slipped into Vincenzo's tattooed one, and the world shifted. They walked, not quickly, not with the hurried efficiency of someone checking a box. Slowly, deliberately, with the kind of measured pace that said, "I want everyone to see this." Vincenzo's burgundy suit caught sunlight as they moved down the estate's driveway. His silver-streaked hair gleamed. Every step was controlled, powerful, unhurried. The walk of someone who owned not just space, but time itself. The security detail followed, but at a distance, Vincenzo dictated with nothing but the set of his shoulders. 20 feet back, close enough to respond, far enough to make clear that this wasn't a protection detail. This was a statement. The estate gates buzzed open. Marcus, the security guard, stammered something that died in his throat when Vincenzo's dark eyes passed over him. The gates, 12 feet of iron and authority that separated the protected from the vulnerable, swung wide. and Vincenzo Moretti stepped through onto the public sidewalk with an 8-year-old's hand in his. The first block moved in slow motion. Noah kept glancing up, disbelieving, waiting for the moment this powerful man would remember he had more important things to do. But Vincenzo's grip remained steady. His pace never changed. "Tell me about the man," Vincenzo said quietly. So Noah did. Told him about the navy jacket and the baseball cap, the way he pretended to read his phone, how he moved closer each day, how he watched not just Noah, but other children too. Vincenzo listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the street with the practiced awareness of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading danger in ordinary spaces. By the second block, people noticed. A woman walking her dog stopped mid-stride, staring. A delivery driver slowed his truck to a crawl. A teenager on a bicycle actually crashed into a mailbox, too distracted to watch where he was going. Because Vincenzo Moretti was walking a child to a bus stop in broad daylight. The neighborhood would talk about it for weeks, months, years. The third block approached, and Noah's steps faltered. His hand tightened in Vincenzo's grip. Because this was where the man always stood. This was where fear lived. But when they rounded the corner, the spot was empty. The van was gone. The navy jacket had vanished. The predator who'd spent weeks mapping Noah's routine had disappeared like smoke the moment Vincenzo Moretti entered the equation. But not quickly enough. Vincenzo had seen him, had marked his face, his posture, his vehicle, had read the situation with the cold precision of someone who understood predators because he'd spent a lifetime being one. They reached the bus stop. 3 other children stood there, the girl with red braids, the twin boys, the teenager with headphones. All of them staring at the man in the burgundy suit like he'd stepped out of a different reality. Vincenzo knelt one more time, meeting Noah's eyes. "You're safe now. Understand?" Noah nodded, not quite believing. "If he comes back, you call this number." Vincenzo pressed a business card into Noah's palm. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, a phone number and nothing else. Anytime, day or night. Then he stood, nodded once to the other children. A gesture that somehow conveyed both warning and protection, and walked back toward the estate. The security detail fell in around him, and Noah watched him go. This man who'd broken every rule to keep a promise no one asked him to make. The message spread faster than fire. By noon, street-level dealers were whispering about it. By evening, the story had reached the ears of people who operated in shadows. By midnight, it had traveled through networks that dealt in information and blood. Vincenzo Moretti walked a staff child to school. Vincenzo Moretti made it personal. Vincenzo Moretti just declared protection over someone who didn't belong to him. In the underworld, that kind of statement meant something. It meant boundaries had shifted. It meant someone untouchable had extended a shield. It meant crossing that line would have consequences that ended in shallow graves. But it also meant something else. It meant vulnerability, exposure, a crack in the armor of a man who'd built his empire on calculated distance. The retaliation came within days. 2 children disappeared from a neighborhood 6 miles away. Different school, different families, but the same age range, the same vulnerability, the same message written in absence and terror. You think you could protect them all? And then, 3 days after Vincenzo's walk, Noah found the note, tucked into his backpack, folded carefully, written in block letters that suggested gloves and caution and someone who knew how to avoid leaving evidence. 8 words. You can't save everyone. Noah's hand shook as he read it. Read it again. Felt the weight of what Vincenzo's kindness had cost. Not just him, not just his mother, but children he'd never met. Children who'd disappeared because a man in a burgundy suit had decided one boy mattered. The predator was still watching. And now, he was hunting with purpose. The war Vincenzo Moretti started with a single act of protection had claimed its first casualties. And the bill was just beginning to come due. The meeting happened in Vincenzo's estate office, a room of dark wood and leather where decisions worth millions were made over single phone calls. But tonight, the conversation wasn't about money. It was about survival. You've made yourself a target. This from Marco Baldini, Vincenzo's oldest advisor, a man whose gray temples and steady voice had guided 3 decades of careful empire building. The note proves it. They're watching you now, studying your patterns, looking for weakness. Vincenzo sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. The solution is containment. Julia Moretti, his cousin and legal counsel, spoke with the precision of someone who'd spent years protecting the family's interests. Secure Noah Rivera. Put a detail on him. Maybe relocate the mother when she recovers. But this stops at your gates. You cannot protect every vulnerable child in the city. She's right. Antonio Ricci, head of security, leaned forward. You walk one kid to school, you send a message. You try to walk them all, you spread yourself too thin. Predators are patient. They'll wait for gaps in coverage. Strike where you're not looking. Use your own protection against you. The logic was sound. Cold but sound. This was how empires survived. By drawing clear boundaries. By protecting what belonged to you and accepting that everything beyond those lines existed in a different world with different rules. By understanding that you couldn't save everyone, so you saved who mattered and let fear do the rest. Vincenzo's dark eyes moved from face to face. People he trusted, people who'd kept him alive and powerful through wars and investigations and betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but absolute. No. The room went still. Vincenzo, Marco began. I said no. Silence. The kind that hummed with unspoken arguments and swallowed protests. Julia tried a different approach. What you did for the boy was compassionate, admirable, but expanding that protection makes you predictable, makes you vulnerable. You've built everything on calculated distance, on being someone people fear to cross. The moment they see you as someone who what? Vincenzo's voice cut through like a blade. Who cares? Who remembers what it feels like to be powerless? He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the estate's grounds. Beyond the manicured lawns and security fences, the city sprawled. Millions of people living millions of stories he'd never know. When I was 7, he said, not turning around, my mother hid me in a closet for 3 hours while she owed money to tore our apartment apart looking for me. No one spoke. Vincenzo rarely mentioned his childhood, never with this kind of raw honesty. I could hear everything through the door, every threat, every slap, every promise about what he'd do if he found me. And when he finally left, my mother pulled me out and told me the same thing you're telling me now. Keep your head down. Stay invisible. That's how you survive. He turned to face them, and something burned in his eyes that none of them had seen before. She was right. I survived, built all of this by understanding that power means distance, that caring makes you weak, that the world is full of predators, and your only choice is to become one or become prey. Then why? Antonio started. Because I'm tired of being the man who looks away. Vincenzo's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of a decision already made. Because that child looked at me, someone who should terrify him, and saw safety. Because his mother tried every system designed to protect people, and every single one failed her. Because 2 children are already gone, and their blood is on my hands the moment I decided one life mattered more than others. Marco shook his head. This isn't about morality, Vincenzo. This is about what you can sustain. What keeps you alive and powerful enough to help anyone at all. Then we redefine sustainability. Julia blinked. What does that mean? It means I didn't build this empire by following conventional rules. Why should I dismantle predators the same way everyone else tries and fails? Vincenzo returned to his desk, pulled out a leather folder, spread photographs across the surface. The man in the navy jacket. The van. License plate numbers. Surveillance footage his team had already pulled from traffic cameras. No violence, he said. We're not starting a war in the streets. But we're going to do what law enforcement can't or won't. He looked at Antonio. I want surveillance on every bus stop, every school route within a 5-mile radius. Not obvious, but there. Rotating vehicles. Faces they won't learn to recognize. Antonio nodded slowly. Marco, financial records. These networks run on money. Find the transactions, the properties, the accounts that don't add up. Feed everything anonymously to the Financial Crimes Division. That could take months. Then we start now. He turned to Julia. You have contacts in law enforcement who owe us. Not the corrupt ones, the good ones. The ones who actually give a damn but lack resources. Anonymous tips, surveillance footage, evidence they can actually use. You're talking about cooperation with. I'm talking about using every tool we have, legal and otherwise, to make this neighborhood so hot that predators move on or get caught. Vincenzo's voice dropped to something that sounded almost like confession. I've spent 30 years being someone people fear. Maybe it's time they fear me for the right reasons. The silence that followed wasn't agreement. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Within a week, cameras appeared in places cameras hadn't existed. Tips flooded police departments from untraceable numbers. Financial investigators suddenly had leads on trafficking networks they'd been chasing for years. And in the neighborhood where Noah Rivera walked to his bus stop, people began to notice something else. They began to speak, to watch, to stop pretending they didn't see what they'd always seen. Invisibility, the kind that protected predators, began to collapse. And Vincenzo Moretti, the man no one approached, became the man everyone whispered about. Not with fear, with hope. The raid happened at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the city was still dark and the predators felt safest. 6 warehouses, 3 counties, coordinated strikes that had taken weeks of planning, mountains of anonymous evidence, and the kind of interagency cooperation that only happened when someone made it impossible to look away. The first door came down in an industrial district where legitimate businesses didn't ask questions about their neighbors. Officers poured in with flashlights cutting through darkness, voices shouting commands, radios crackling with codes that meant children found. 11 kids, ages 7 to 14. Some have been missing for weeks. One for nearly 3 months. All alive. The second location yielded financial records, ledgers that mapped a network spanning 4 states, transactions that connected faces to crimes, money trails that led to people who'd operated in shadows for decades. By dawn, the third warehouse gave up its occupants without a fight. 5 men in custody. Hard drives seized. Evidence that would take months to fully process, but would dismantle an operation that had thrived on one simple truth. Nobody was watching. Until someone did. The media coverage exploded by midday. Press conferences featured grim-faced police chiefs and FBI agents praising unprecedented cooperation and tireless investigative work. Reporters pressed for details about how the breakthrough happened, who provided the tips, what changed. The official line never wavered. Multiple credible sources. Ongoing investigation. Cannot comment further. Vincenzo Moretti's name never appeared in a single report. But in the neighborhoods where power was measured in whispers rather than press releases, everyone knew. Street-level dealers knew. The legitimate business owners who'd looked the other way knew. The families who'd filed missing person reports that went nowhere knew. The man who'd made it personal had followed through. Not with violence. Not with the brutal efficiency of someone eliminating competition. But with something more dangerous to people who relied on invisibility. Light. He turned the lights on. Stripped away the darkness that predators needed to hunt. Made silence so expensive that even the most careful operations couldn't afford it anymore. And when the trafficking route collapsed, trucks that would never make their deliveries, safe houses that were suddenly very unsafe, contacts who stopped answering phones, the entire network imploded under the weight of its own exposure. Some predators fled the city. Others went to ground, hoping enough time would let them resurface. A few made the mistake of trying to retaliate. Those few learned that Vincenzo Moretti's willingness to work within legal boundaries had limits that ended exactly where children's safety began. The man in the navy jacket was never seen again. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning that felt impossibly ordinary, Vincenzo stood at the corner of Maple Street watching the bus stop from distance. The burgundy suit had been replaced with dark slacks and a simple black jacket. The security detail was there, but invisible, scattered across rooftops and parked cars and coffee shops with sightlines. Protection without presence. Noah Rivera approached the bus stop alone, his white school shirt pressed, his backpack lighter somehow, his steps steady. He wasn't the only one. The girl with red braids walked beside him now, talking animatedly about something that made Noah smile. The twin boys trailed behind, holding hands but no longer looking over their shoulders every few seconds. The teenager with headphones nodded a greeting as they all clustered together. A small community born from shared fear that had transformed into shared safety. The bus rounded the corner. Its brakes hissed. The door folded open. Noah glanced back, not toward Vincenzo, but toward the street itself, taking in the morning with the careful awareness of someone who'd learned to read danger but no longer expected to find it. Then he climbed aboard. The door closed. The bus pulled away. And just like that, Noah Rivera walked forward into his day without needing a man in a burgundy suit to make him feel safe. Vincenzo watched until the bus disappeared from view. Then he turned and walked back toward his car, where Antonio waited with an expression that might have been respect or might have been something deeper, recognition that they'd just witnessed the rarest kind of victory. Not the kind where you win by destroying your enemies. The kind where you win by making yourself unnecessary. He didn't even look for you, Antonio said quietly. Good. Vincenzo's voice carried something that could have been satisfaction or could have been grief for all the years he'd spent believing distance was the only form of power that mattered. That means it worked. What worked? Teaching him that protection isn't something someone gives you. It's something you build together by refusing to stay silent when silence is what predators need most. The black Mercedes pulled away from the curb, leaving the bus stop behind. Just another corner in a city full of corners, where children now walked with their chins lifted and their fear replaced by something stronger. Not because someone powerful had saved them, but because someone powerful had shown them they were worth saving. And sometimes that's the only difference between a world that protects its vulnerable and a world that sacrifices them to maintain its own comfortable silence. Protection isn't power over someone. It's knowing when to stand beside them, when to stand behind them, and when to step back and let their own courage walk forward. It's understanding that the strongest thing you can do isn't always what proves your strength. Sometimes it's what proves theirs. Vincenzo Moretti learned what many people never do. That empire built on fear might last, but legacy built on making yourself unnecessary changes the world. Noah Rivera learned something too. That asking for help isn't weakness. That vulnerability can be a different kind of strength. That sometimes the scariest person in the room might be the safest one to approach. And in a city full of people who'd learned to look away, a neighborhood learned to look closer, to speak louder, to refuse the silence that predators need to survive. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about courage, protection, and the moments that define who we really are. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear that asking for help is brave, not weak. Because sometimes the most powerful thing any of us can do is simply refuse to look away. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, you're never as invisible as someone taught you to believe.